He was bleeding billions, not from a gunshot wound, but a boardroom hemorrhage. Dante Costa's empire was stalling because a dead fixer took his languages to the grave. Men in expensive suits shouted over each other, deals collapsing in translation. Meanwhile, Harper wiped the marble floors, entirely invisible, just a maid with a mop and a heavy debt. But when the guns finally cleared the holsters over a misunderstood threat, she didn't run. She spoke, and the underworld stopped to listen. The smell of bleach and artificial pine was Harper's armor. As long as she smelled like industrial cleaning supplies, the men in the Costa estate didn't look at her. They looked right through her. She preferred it that way. In a house where disputes were settled with suppressed pistols in soundproofed basement, visibility was a liability. Harper kept her head down. She scrubbed the imported Italian marble until her knuckles cracked and bled, vacuumed the Persian rugs in the sprawling library, and emptied ashtrays that smelled of expensive cigars and nervous sweat. She was 26, burdened by a mountain of medical debt, left behind by a mother who had the audacity to die slowly in a broken healthcare system. The Costa family paid in cash under the table, and they paid very well. That was all that mattered. Dante Costa did not notice her. To the head of the most lucrative organized crime syndicate on the East Coast, Harper was just part of the furniture, a ghost in a gray uniform. Dante was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and sleep deprivation. He didn't strut. He didn't yell. He moved with a quiet, lethal efficiency that made the air in the room grow cold. But lately, the edges of his control were fraying. Harper noticed it in the small things, the way he left his scotch untouched on the mahogany desk, the way his knuckles whitened when his phone rang, the shattered crystal glass she had to sweep up from the fireplace hearth 3 days in a row. He was losing money, a lot of it. Harper knew this because the men in the house talked. They assumed the maid didn't understand finance or logistics or the intricate web of international smuggling. They were wrong on all counts. Before her life derailed, Harper had been 2 years into a degree in international relations. Now her education consisted of eavesdropping while dusting bookshelves. The problem was a port in Marseille. The Costa family had a massive shipment of illegal arms and narcotics stalled at the docks. Their primary European liaison, an old-school fixer named Thomas, had died of a sudden violent heart attack 2 weeks ago. Thomas was the only one who spoke the specific hybridized slang of the French Corsican underworld. He was the bridge. Without him, the bridge collapsed. Every day the shipment sat at the docks. Millions of dollars evaporated. Rival syndicates were circling. Bribes to French port authorities were expiring. Dante needed to negotiate directly with Gaston Laurent, the brutal, notoriously stubborn head of the Mara cartel. But Gaston despised Americans and refused to speak English. Dante spoke fluent Italian and Spanish, but his French was limited to menu items. To bridge the gap, Dante had hired a succession of corporate translators. Harper watched them come and go. Men and women with crisp degrees from Georgetown and Columbia, walking into the estate with briefcases and leaving hours later, pale and shaking. Corporate translators knew how to negotiate mergers. They didn't know how to negotiate blood money. They translated Gaston's veiled threats literally, missing the cultural nuance, the street slang, the implicit danger. "The man is playing us," Dante's underboss Carmine muttered one afternoon. Harper was polishing the brass handles of the study doors, keeping her breathing shallow. "He's charging us holding fees while he negotiates with the Russians behind our back. We need to cut ties. Sink the shipment. We sink the shipment. We lose $2 billion, Dante replied. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of panic but heavy with exhaustion. "We don't sink anything. Gaston is coming here tomorrow night." Carmine scoffed. "And who's translating?" "The kid from the agency." He nearly pissed himself when Gaston mentioned pruning the garden on the phone yesterday. He thought Gaston was talking about actual landscaping. "He's the best the agency has," Dante said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Just make sure the dining room is secure, no mistakes. If this deal goes south, we go to war." Harper stopped polishing. Her rag hovered over the brass. War meant chaos. Chaos meant a higher risk of stray bullets, police raids, and unpaid wages. She needed this job. She needed the envelope of cash on Friday to keep the bank from foreclosing on her tiny apartment. She finished the doorknob, picked up her bucket, and walked down the long, shadowed hallway. She didn't care about Dante Costa's billions, but she cared very much about her own survival. And tomorrow night, Gaston Laurent was walking into a powder keg. Harper had spent 4 years in her teens living in Marseille with her estranged father, a man who ran a dive bar frequented by the very cartel Gaston now controlled. She knew the language, not the polished academic French taught in universities. She knew the gutter French, the slang of the docks, the quiet, deadly idioms of men who settled arguments with knives. She just had to hope they didn't kill each other before dessert. The tension in the dining room the next evening was thick enough to choke on. Harper was assigned to dinner service. It was a rare occurrence, usually reserved for the older, more experienced staff, but 2 of the regular waiters had called in sick. Fear was contagious. Harper wore a starched white apron over her black uniform, a silver tray balanced on her palm. Her face was a blank mask. The dining table was massive, carved from dark walnut. On one side sat Dante Costa and Carmine. Dante wore a charcoal suit, his posture relaxed, but his eyes scanning the room like a hawk, looking for a soft underbelly. On the other side sat Gaston Laurent. Gaston was a large man with a thick neck, wearing a silk shirt unbuttoned to reveal a gold chain nested in gray chest hair. He brought 2 massive bodyguards who stood by the doors, their arms crossed, jackets bulging. Sitting nervously between the 2 factions was Simon, the translator. Simon looked like he belonged in a cubicle, not a mob sit-down. He was sweating profusely, dabbing his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief. He had a notepad in front of him, his pen shaking slightly. Harper poured a heavy Cabernet into Gaston's glass. She stepped back, melting into the shadows by the antique sideboard. Dinner had been a disaster from the start. Gaston was intentionally speaking fast, dropping his consonants, wrapping his demands in thick Marl's argot. Simon was struggling to keep up, his translations stilted and formal. "Tell him," Dante said, cutting a piece of rare steak, "that the port fees he is demanding are unacceptable. We agreed on a 20% cut for transit, not 30. Simon turned to Gaston. He spoke in polite textbook French. Monsieur Costa respectfully declines the 30%. He wishes to maintain the 20% agreement. Gaston laughed. It was a harsh scraping sound. He leaned forward, ignoring his food, and unleashed a rapid-fire string of French. Harper closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. She understood exactly what Gaston had said. "Tell the pretty boy in the nice suit that agreements are like virginity, my friend. They only matter the first time. The price is 30 or his boats will rust at my docks while his enemies eat his scraps." Simon swallowed hard. He looked at his notepad. He says the agreement has changed. He insists on 30% or the boats will remain at the docks." Dante stopped chewing. He looked at Simon, then at Gaston. That's all he said. It took him 20 seconds to say that. It's a very complex language, sir." Simon stammered. "I don't need a linguistic lesson, Simon. I need to know if I'm being insulted." Dante wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. "Tell him I am offering 25, a final offer. If he refuses, I will pull my infrastructure out of Marl's entirely, and he can explain to the local unions why they aren't getting paid." Simon relayed the message. His French was too soft, too differential. He made Dante sound like a frustrated middle manager, not a kingpin making a threat. Gaston's eyes narrowed. He didn't like Dante, but he hated weakness even more. The cartel boss picked up a steak knife, turning it over in his thick fingers. He looked directly at Dante and spoke in a low, rumbling growl. Harper froze. Her grip on the silver tray tightened. Simon stared at Gaston, completely lost. He recognized some words, but the heavy slang and the terrifying delivery had short-circuited his brain. He turned to Dante, his face the color of spoiled milk. "Well," Dante demanded, "what did he say?" Simon cleared his throat. "He said, you cannot threaten him in his home. He said if you touch the unions, he will clip your wings. He mentioned emptying the boats and throwing your men in the ocean. He says it is 30 or war." It wasn't a terrible translation, strictly speaking, but it lacked the nuance. It lacked the specific hyperviolent street terminology Gaston had used. And worse, Simon had delivered it with a trembling voice, making the threat sound erratic and hysterical rather than a cold, calculated promise. Dante's jaw locked. He looked at Carmine. A silent communication passed between them. Carmine's hand slowly dropped below the table. He was reaching for his gun. Gaston saw the movement. His own men by the door shifted, their hands disappearing inside their jackets, the air sucked out of the room. A bloodbath was seconds away. Dante was going to shoot Gaston here in the dining room, which would trigger an international gang war that would tear the city apart. The money would be gone. The peace would be gone. And Harper would have to clean the blood out of the Persian rug. Blood never came out of wool. She didn't think. She just moved. "Excuse me." The voice was quiet, but it cut through the heavy, suffocating silence of the room like a razor blade. Everyone froze. 8 pairs of eyes snapped towards the shadows by the sideboard. Harper stepped forward into the dim light of the chandelier. She still held her silver tray. Her face was completely devoid of expression. Carmine's gun was half-drawn from his waistband. Dante stared at her, his brow furrowed in utter confusion. A maid was speaking during a sit-down. It was so unprecedented that the shock temporarily overrode the adrenaline of the impending shootout. "What the hell are you doing?" Carmine hissed, his voice lethal. "Get out." Harper ignored him. She kept her eyes on Dante. "He didn't say he would clip your wings, Mr. Costa." Dante didn't move. His dark eyes drilled into her. "What?" Simon's translation was too literal. Harper set the tray down on the sideboard with a soft clink. The sound was deafening in the quiet room. Gaston didn't use the standard phrasing for clipping wings, he used coupe liesels. In the Marseille docks, that doesn't mean restricting your movement. It means executing your lieutenants. He's threatening Carmine. Carmine stiffened. Harper didn't stop. She turned her gaze to Gaston. The French boss was staring at her, a mixture of outrage and curiosity on his scarred face. Harper switched to French, not Simon's polite classroom French. She slipped effortlessly into the harsh, guttural rhythm of the Marseille streets. Her voice dropped an octave, losing the subservient tone of a maid and taking on the weary, cynical cadence of a dock worker. "Respect, Gaston," Harper said smoothly. "He is not disrespecting you, but you know how it is. 25 is the price of peace. If you take 30, you choke on your own meal. The Russians will eat you alive." Gaston's eyes widened. He sat back in his chair, the steak knife slipping from his fingers to clatter against the porcelain plate. He looked at this tiny girl in a maid's uniform, speaking the language of his home with flawless, cynical precision. "Cuda," Gaston demanded, his voice devoid of the previous venom, replaced entirely by shock. "Who are you?" "Person," Harper replied. "Nobody. Just someone who doesn't want to clean blood off this beautiful rug tonight." Gaston stared at her for a long, stretched moment, then a booming laugh erupted from his chest. It wasn't the mocking laugh from earlier. It was genuine, deep belly laughter. He slapped the table, causing the crystal glasses to rattle. He looked at Dante, pointing a thick finger at Harper. "She speaks the truth." Gaston bellowed in heavy broken English, surprising everyone in the room. He rarely used English unless he absolutely had to. "Your translator. He's a child, a boy playing with matches. But this one, this little mouse." He laughed again. "She has the teeth of a wolf." Dante slowly pushed his chair back. He didn't take his eyes off Harper. The tension in his shoulders had unwound just slightly, but his gaze was sharp enough to cut glass. 25, Gaston said, looking back at Dante. He picked up his wine glass and she pours the drinks next time I come. Agreed. Dante held Gaston's gaze for a second, then raised his own glass. Agreed. The collective exhale in the room was almost audible. Carmine's hand moved away from his waistband. Gaston's bodyguards relaxed their stances. Simon, the corporate translator, looked like he was going to vomit into his napkin. Harper quietly picked up her silver tray. Her hands were shaking now, a delayed reaction to the sheer insanity of what she had just done. She stepped backward, melting into the shadows once more. The rest of the dinner went smoothly. Gaston, amused by the sudden turn of events, was remarkably agreeable. The terms were settled. $2 billion in delayed shipments were effectively unblocked. When dessert was finished, Gaston and his men left, leaving a heavy silence in the dining room. Harper was clearing the plates. She stacked the fine china, her head down, hoping they would just let her leave. "Simon," Dante said. He was sitting at the head of the table, smoking a cigar. The translator flinched. "Yes, Mr. Costa, you're fired. Get out of my house." Simon didn't argue. He scrambled up, grabbed his briefcase, and practically ran for the front door. Harper kept clearing the table. She picked up Gaston's empty wine glass. "Leave it," Dante said. Harper stopped. She stood perfectly still. "Carmine, give us a minute," Dante commanded. Carmine nodded. He gave Harper a long assessing look before walking out of the dining room, shutting the heavy oak doors behind him. The sound echoed like a vault ceiling. Harper stood alone with the most dangerous man in the city. Dante stood up. He walked slowly around the long table. He didn't look angry. He looked intensely curious. He stopped a few feet from her, the smoke from his cigar curling into the chandelier above. "I know the names of everyone who works in my house," Dante said softly. "But I don't know yours, Harper," she said. Her voice was steady despite the hammering of her heart against her ribs. "Harper." He tested the name on his tongue. "You saved me a war tonight, Harper. You saved me a lot of money." "I just did my job, Mr. Costa. The house needs to be kept clean." Dante's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. "Where did a maid learn to speak French like a cartel enforcer?" "I lived in Marseille for a few years," she said, keeping it vague. "I pick things up. You pick things up." He stepped closer. He towered over her, radiating a quiet, absolute authority. Simon had a master's degree in linguistics from Yale. He picked up nothing. You picked up the exact phrasing needed to de-escalate a sociopath. Simon didn't understand that Gaston's pride was hurt. He was translating the words, not the ego. Harper met his gaze. It was a mistake. Looking into Dante Costa's eyes was like looking over the edge of a very steep cliff. "It won't happen again, sir. I apologize for interrupting." "Don't apologize." Dante took a slow drag of his cigar. He blew the smoke away from her face. "How much do I pay you to clean my floors, Harper?" She blinked, caught off guard. $22 an hour, sir." Dante reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a thick money clip, peeled off a stack of $100 bills, at least $5,000, and placed it on a silver tray. "You don't clean floors anymore," Dante said, his voice a low, growly command. "Tomorrow morning, you report to my study at 8 o'clock a.m. You're going to sit in on my calls with Bogater. Let's see how your Spanish is." Harper stared at the cash. It was enough to pay off 3 months of debt in one go. She looked back up at him. I'm a maid, Mr. Costa. Not anymore. Dante turned and walked toward the doors. He paused, looking over his shoulder. You're my voice now, Harper, don't be late. He left her standing in the empty dining room, the stack of bills heavy on her tray, realizing with a cold spike of dread that she was no longer invisible. She had stepped out of the shadows, right into the crosshairs of Dante Costa's world. 8 a.m. came entirely too fast. Harper stood outside the heavy mahogany doors of Dante Costa's study. She wore a plain black turtleneck and gray slacks, the best she could scrape together from her meager closet. She had left her uniform neatly folded on her unmade bed. Leaving the rough, bleached, stained fabric behind felt less like a promotion and more like shedding armor. In the uniform, she was a ghost. In these clothes, she was a target. She knocked twice. The wood was solid, swallowing the sound. Dante was already at his desk. The man didn't seem to sleep. He was reviewing a ledger. An unlit cigar clamped between his teeth. Carmine stood by the window, peering through the heavy velvet drapes at the estate grounds. Carmine didn't bother hiding his disdain as Harper walked in. To him, she was an anomaly. Anomalies in their line of work usually ended up dead or testifying. Sit, Dante said, not looking up from the ledger. Harper took the leather chair opposite his desk. It was soft, expensive, and entirely too deep. It made her feel small. She kept her spine rigid, refusing to lean back. Boggetter, Dante said, finally closing the ledger. He tossed it aside. We deal with a man named Espen. He controls the trafficking routes through the southern corridor. Esteban is polite. Espen is a gentleman, but his shipments have been light the past 2 months, 10% across the board. And you think he's skimming? Harper said, I know he's skimming. Dante corrected. His voice was flat, devoid of anger, which somehow made it worse. I need to know if he's doing it because he's greedy or because he's weak. If he's greedy, we renegotiate his breathing privileges. If he's weak, it means the federales are squeezing him and we need to reroute. I need you to listen to him. Really listen. Carmine scoffed. She's a maid, Dante, not a polygraph. Dante didn't even glance at his underboss. He just stared at Harper. She speaks the language of desperation, Carmine. I saw it last night. Let's see if it translates. He pressed a button on a sleek black speakerphone. The line trilled 3 times before a smooth baritone voice answered in Spanish. Dante, my friend, it is a pleasure. Dante leaned back, gesturing for Harper to take over. Harper leaned toward the microphone. She switched to Spanish. Colombian dialect, soft consonants, formal but guarded. Mr. Costa returns the greeting, Espen. He wishes to discuss the recent discrepancies in the transit weights. There was a slight pause on the other end. Ah, the new voice. Where is the usual man? The one who sounds like he is reading a textbook. He was reassigned. Harper replied smoothly. Mr. Costa prefers efficiency over textbooks today. Esteban chuckled, but it sounded thin. Harper closed her eyes, focusing entirely on the audio, the ambient noise in the background, the rhythm of his breathing. For 20 minutes they danced. Dante would write a note on a slip of paper and slide it across the desk. Harper would translate the demand into Spanish, softening the edges just enough to keep Espen talking, but keeping the core threat intact. Espen gave a masterclass in deflection. He blamed the humidity affecting the scales. He blamed a new shift of dock workers. He spoke eloquently about honor and long-standing partnerships. When he finally hung up, the study was silent. Dante looked at her, waiting. He's not greedy, Harper said quietly. She opened her eyes. He's terrified. Carmine crossed his arms. He sounded fine to me, confident. He used the formal stead when he talked about the missing weight, but slipped into casual slang when he talked about the weather. Harper explained. She looked at Dante. He's reading from a script when he excuses the losses, and there was a distinct echo on the line. He wasn't in his usual office. He was in a large empty room, a warehouse maybe. I heard a metal door slam in the background, followed by a very faint click. Dante's eyes narrowed. What kind of click? Like a radio mic keying up, Harper said, or a recording device. I think the federales already have him, Mr. Costa. I think they were in the room with him. Carmine swore under his breath. Dante remained perfectly still. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then Dante picked up his cell phone. He dialed a number, held it to his ear, and spoke 2 words. Burn it, he hung up. Millions of dollars of infrastructure wiped out with a breath. He looked back at Harper. The intensity in his dark eyes made her chest tighten. You need new clothes, Dante said. He pulled a black credit card from his wallet and tossed it onto the desk. It landed with a plastic clatter between them. Buy suits. Buy whatever you need. But when you're in this room, you represent me. Understand? Harper looked at the card. It was a lifeline and a leash, all rolled into one piece of plastic. She reached out and took it. Understood. 3 weeks passed. Harper's life transformed into a surreal high-stakes blur. The crushing weight of her mother's medical debt was gone, wiped out by a single anonymous wire transfer that Dante had arranged without a word. Her tiny, drafty apartment was traded for a suite on the third floor of the Costa estate. She had a closet full of tailored blazers and silk blouses. She ate food prepared by a private chef. She was richer than she had ever been, and she was entirely trapped. She belonged to the syndicate now. She was Dante's shadow. She sat in on calls with Russian oligarchs, Sicilian heavyweights, and corrupt politicians. She learned that the underworld was less about shootouts in the street and more about agonizingly tense board meetings, whispered threats over espresso, and reading the microscopic shifts in a liar's posture. And she learned about Dante. He was a man of terrifying contradictions. He ordered men beaten with the same calm demeanor he used to order his morning coffee. Yet he never raised his voice at the estate staff. He ensured the widows of his fallen soldiers were compensated generously. He was a monster who operated strictly by a self-imposed rigid moral code. Late one Thursday night, the estate was quiet. The heavy rain lashed against the library windows. Harper was at the long oak table, translating a dense handwritten contract from a contact in Palmo. The Italian dialect was archaic, full of veiled metaphors that gave her a headache. The door opened with a soft click. Dante walked in. He wore a white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, his tie discarded somewhere between the foyer and here. He looked exhausted. The brutal machinery of his life was grinding him down, even if he never let anyone else see it. He walked over to a crystal decanter on a side table and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He set one down next to Harper's laptop. "Drink," he said. "You've been staring at that screen for 6 hours." Harper looked at the glass, then up at him. "It's a complicated contract. They are burying a penalty clause on page 4 under a metaphor about olive harvests." Dante sat heavily in the chair next to hers. He took a sip of his scotch. Sicilians, they'd rather write poetry than a straight invoice. He didn't leave. He just sat there, the rain drumming a chaotic rhythm against the glass. The silence between them was different now. It had shifted from the cold, terrifying gap between a boss and a maid to something heavier, something almost domestic, built on shared secrets and late nights. "You cleared the debt," Harper said quietly, looking at her screen rather than him. "I never thanked you." "I didn't do it for gratitude," Dante said. His voice was low, blending with the sound of the rain. "I did it because distraction is a liability. You can't listen to the Russians if you're worrying about a bank foreclosure." "Right. Purely transactional." Dante turned his head to look at her. His gaze was heavy, physical in its weight. "Is that what you think this is? I think I am a very expensive piece of software to you, Mr. Costa. A human translation app." She finally looked at him. She was tired and the scotch was making her bold. "And I think you keep me in this house because you know I know too much to ever leave." Dante didn't flinch. He slowly swirled the liquor in his glass. "You think you're a prisoner, Harper. I think a cage is a cage, even if the bars are made of silk." He set his glass down. He leaned in just a fraction, invading her space. She could smell the scotch, the cedar, the faint metallic scent of gunpowder that always seemed to linger on his skin. "If I let you walk out that door right now," Dante said, his voice a dangerous murmur, "you'd be dead in a week. Gaston knows your face. Espen's people know your voice. The Chicago outfit knows there's a girl sitting by my side who catches every lie they tell." He reached out, his knuckles brushing briefly against the cold metal of her laptop, missing her hand by an inch. "You aren't a prisoner, Harper. You're protected. There is a difference. I didn't ask for this life." "Nobody asks for this life," he replied softly. "It just swallows you. The trick is learning how to swallow back." He stood up, leaving his glass half empty on the table. He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the brass knob. "Finish page 4. Leave the rest for tomorrow. Get some sleep." When the door clicked shut, Harper let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking slightly. She took a long swallow of the scotch. It burned all the way down, leaving a hollow heat in her chest. She wasn't just translating his words anymore. She was starting to understand him. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. The neutrality of a location in the criminal underworld was always an illusion. The warehouse in the meatpacking district was vast, freezing cold, and smelled of rust and bleach. It was chosen because it belonged to neither the Costa family nor the Chicago syndicate. It was supposed to be a safe zone to negotiate the boundaries of a new distribution network through the Midwest. Harper stood slightly behind Dante's left shoulder. She wore a heavy wool pica coat over her suit, her breath pluming in the frigid air. Carmine and 4 heavily armed soldiers flanked them, their eyes scanning the dark catwalks above. Opposite them stood Sullivan. Sullivan was a wire-thin man with a pockmarked face and a smile that never reached his pale eyes. He commanded the Chicago outfit with a chaotic, unpredictable violence that made even Dante cautious. Sullivan had brought his own men and his own translator, a nervous-looking man clutching a briefcase. Sullivan preferred to speak in a thick-coded Gaelic slang he'd inherited from his father. It was a regional bastardization designed to confuse wiretaps. Harper had spent the last 3 days immersing herself in audio recordings to crack the syntax. Tell the suit, Sullivan rasped, grinning at his own translator, that we take 40% of the rail lines. If he bucks, he can find another city to park his freight. Sullivan's translator turned to Dante. Mr. Sullivan requests a 40% share of the rail logistics. He insists it is non-negotiable. Dante didn't look at the translator, he looked at Harper. Harper stepped forward, closing the distance just enough to be heard over the hum of the warehouse generators. She didn't use the polite corporate tone, she mirrored Sullivan's aggressive cadence. 40% is a tax on a kingdom you don't rule, Sullivan. Harper translated Dante's pre-approved counter-offer, her voice carrying sharply in the cold air. 25. We use our own guards on the trains. Your men just open the gates. Sullivan's smile slipped. He looked at Harper, really looking at her for the first time. Where'd you find this one, Costa? She's got a mouth on her. She speaks for me. Dante said flatly. Focus on the numbers, Sullivan. Sullivan chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. He switched back to his heavy slang, speaking rapidly to his men, ignoring Dante. Harper listened, her brain working in overdrive, stripping away the thick accent, passing the street terms. The back door is open. The dogs are asleep. Let the rain fall. It wasn't a counteroffer. It was an execution order. Gun, Harper screamed. She didn't wait to translate. She slammed her hands into Dante's back, shoving him hard to the right. The warehouse erupted. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire shattered the cold air. Sparks rained down from the catwalk above as a hidden shooter opened fire on their position. The concrete floor where Dante had been standing a split second before was chewed into dust by a spray of bullets. Chaos reigned. Carmine yelled orders, returning fire, his handgun booming in the enclosed space. Sullivan's men were already moving, drawing weapons from their coats. Dante didn't fall. He stumbled from Harper's shove, caught his balance, and moved with a terrifying fluid grace. He drew his weapon from his shoulder holster in a blur of motion. But his first instinct wasn't to shoot Sullivan. His first instinct was Harper. He grabbed the lapel of her peacoat, yanking her violently behind a massive rusting steel pillar just as a line of bullets stitched across the metal inches from her face. The sound was deafening, a high-pitched ping-ping-ping that rattled her teeth. Stay down, Dante roared, pressing her against the cold steel. His body was a shield, caging her against the pillar. Harper was gasping for air, the adrenaline hitting her system like a physical blow. Her ears were ringing. The smell of cordite and copper filled the air, choking and thick. She looked up at Dante. His face was a mask of cold fury. His jaw clenched so hard a muscle ticked in his cheek. He wasn't the calm businessman in the study anymore. He was the warlord. He leaned out from behind the pillar, firing 3 rapid, deafening shots. A heavy body hit the concrete somewhere in the dark. Carmine the catwalk. Dante shouted on it. Carmine's voice barked back over the den. Dante ducked back behind the pillar as another volley of fire struck the metal. He looked down at Harper. His dark eyes searched her face, her shoulders, looking for blood. Are you hit? He demanded, his voice rough. No, Harper choked out, her hands gripping the front of his jacket instinctively. I'm okay. For a fraction of a second, the violence around them seemed to mute. Dante's hand came up, his thumb briefly, roughly brushing against her cheekline, checking her for debris. It was a fiercely protective gesture, completely stripped of any professional boundary. Don't move, he commanded. He turned away from her, stepping out from the cover of the steel pillar into the storm of bullets, raising his gun to reclaim his empire. Harper stayed, huddled against the cold metal, her heart hammering against her ribs, realizing with terrifying clarity that he had chosen to cover her before he returned fire. He was supposed to be her boss, her captor, the man who owned her debt. But as the gunfire echoed through the warehouse, Harper knew the ledger between them had just been ripped apart. The bulletproof SUV tore through the midnight rain, its tires aggressively gripping the slick asphalt. Inside the cabin, the silence was absolute and suffocating. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the deafening vacuum left behind by sustained automatic gunfire. Harper stared blankly at her hands in her lap. They were shaking. A fine, uncontrollable tremor ran through her fingers, radiating up her forearms. Her ears still rang with a high-pitched whine, muting the heavy thrum of the V8 engine and the rhythmic thap of the windshield wipers. She could still smell it. Cordite, burnt metal, and the sharp coppery stench of fresh blood. Carmine was driving. His right hand was tight on the steering wheel, his left arm pressed firmly against his side. Blood soaked through the dark fabric of his suit jacket, dripping slowly onto the leather seat. He didn't complain. He didn't even grit his teeth. He just drove with a terrifying, single-minded focus. Dante sat next to Harper in the back. He hadn't spoken since they piled into the vehicle under the covering fire of his remaining soldiers. He sat completely rigid in the darkness, staring straight ahead at the rain-lashed windshield. The street lights flashed rhythmically across his face, illuminating the stark stone-carved lines of his jaw and the cold emptiness in his eyes. The warlord was still awake. He was cataloging his losses, running tactical calculations, planning the retaliatory strike. Harper looked at him. The sleeve of his custom charcoal suit was torn at the bicep. Beneath the ragged wool, his white shirt was stained a deep spreading crimson. "You're bleeding," Harper said. Her voice sounded thin and frail, like dry paper tearing. Dante didn't look at her. He barely blinked. "It's a graze, don't worry about it." "It's not a graze, Mr. Costa. It's soaking through your jacket," I said. "Leave it, Harper." His voice was a low, vibrating growl, an explicit warning to push no further. She flinched, shrinking back into the cold leather of her seat. The protective gesture in the warehouse, his body covering hers, his hand checking her face, felt like a hallucination now. The man beside her was entirely shut down. The wall was back up, thicker and higher than before. They reached the estate 20 minutes later. The iron gates swung open, revealing a property swarming with armed guards. The house had transitioned from a sanctuary into a fortress. As soon as the SUV stopped at the portico, the doors were wrenched open by men in tactical gear. Carmine staggered out, cursing under his breath as the pain finally seemed to register. Dr. Evans, a disgraced surgeon who lived on Dante's payroll for nights exactly like this, was already waiting in the foyer with a trauma kit. Dante stepped out of the car. He moved without a limp, without any sign of distress, projecting total, unshakable authority to the men watching him. He walked straight into the foyer, his eyes bypassing the doctor entirely. "Get Carmine to the basement clinic," Dante ordered, his voice echoing off the marble floor. "Lock down the perimeter. No one enters, no one leaves. Sullivan's people will be hunting." "Dante, your arm." Dr. Evans started, reaching toward the boss. Dante swatted the doctor's hand away with brutal force. "Carmine first. I have phone calls to make." He turned on his heel and walked towards the heavy doors of his study. Harper stood in the foyer. Shivering despite the warmth of the house, the adrenaline was finally leaving her system, replaced by a bone-deep, hollow exhaustion. She watched Dante disappear into his office. She looked at Dr. Evans, who was now helping a pale, sweating Carmine down the hallway towards the secure basement. She should go to her suite. She should strip off the clothes that smelled of gunfire, stand under a scalding shower until her skin turned red, and try to forget the sound of bullets chewing into the steel pillar inches from her head. She was a translator. Her job was done for the night. Instead, she walked into the kitchen. The estate staff was gone, evacuated to the safe rooms an hour ago when the lockdown started. The vast stainless steel kitchen was eerily quiet. Harper found a clean dish towel, a bowl of warm water, and the secondary first aid kit kept under the counter for minor kitchen burns. She walked back down the hallway carrying the supplies. She didn't knock on the study doors, she just pushed them open. Dante was standing behind his desk. He had managed to shrug off his ruined suit jacket, dumping it onto the leather chair. He was trying to untie his silk tie with one hand, his left arm hanging uselessly at his side. The white sleeve of his shirt was completely saturated with dark blood. His face was pale, tight with suppressed agony. He looked up sharply as she entered, his dark eyes flashing with irritation. "I said I had calls to make. You haven't picked up the phone," Harper replied, setting the bowl of water and the first aid kit onto the mahogany desk, right on top of a stack of shipping manifests. "Get out, Harper." "No," the word hung in the air, heavy and insubordinate. Dante stopped wrestling with his tie. He stared at her, genuinely taken aback. In the 5 years he had run the syndicate, no one, not even Carmine, said no to him so flatly. Harper walked around the desk. She stopped inches from him. She could feel the heat radiating off his body, smell the sharp, metallic tang of the blood soaking his shirt. She reached up, her small, trembling hands brushing his fingers away from his collar. Dante stiffened, his muscles locking, but he didn't stop her. Harper unknotted his tie and pulled it free, dropping it onto the desk. Then she moved to the buttons of his ruined shirt. Her knuckles brushed against his chest. He was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling in a harsh, uneven rhythm. "You saved my life," Harper said softly, her eyes fixed on the bloody fabric as she worked the buttons loose. "You pushed me behind that pillar. You covered me. You pushed me first." Dante counted, his voice losing its harsh edge, dropping to a rough murmur. "You saw the trap before the gunfire started. You saved my life first, Harper." "I just returned the favor. You're a mob boss, Dante." She used his first name deliberately. The formality of Mr. Costa had died on the concrete floor of the warehouse. "You aren't supposed to return favors to the hired help at the risk of your own life." She peeled the blood-soaked shirt off his left shoulder. He sucked in a sharp breath through his teeth. It wasn't a graze. A bullet had gouged a deep, ugly trench through the meat of his upper bicep. It was still bleeding sluggishly. "You aren't the hired help," Dante said, looking down at her. Harper soaked the dish towel in the warm water and began to gently clean the blood away from the wound. "Then what am I?" Dante didn't answer immediately. He watched her face. He watched the deep concentration in her eyes, the slight furrow of her brow, the way she didn't flinch away from the raw, violent reality of his flesh. "You're the only person in this city who actually listens to what I don't say," Dante finally answered. Harper paused. She looked up, their faces were inches apart. The cold, ruthless warlord was gone. The man looking back at her was exhausted, bruised, and dangerously unguarded. Press this against the wound, Harper whispered, handing him a wad of sterile gauze from the kit. Hold it tight. Dr. Evans needs to stitch it. Dante took the gauze, pressing it against his arm, his eyes never leaving hers. He'll stitch it, but you stay right here while he does it. It wasn't an order. It was a request. Harper nodded, stepping back just as a heavy knock sounded at the study door. The perimeter was secured. The adrenaline crash was over. The war was about to begin. For the next 48 hours, the Costa estate operated like a subterranean bunker. Sullivan had vanished. The Chicago boss knew his botched ambush meant a death sentence, and he had immediately gone to ground. His lieutenants scattered across the city, hiding in safe houses, waiting for the heat to die down. But Dante didn't let the heat die down. He turned the city into an inferno. Carmine, his shoulder heavily bandaged, commanded the street soldiers. They hit 3 of Sullivan's suspected warehouses, burning them to the foundations. They intercepted a shipment of weapons meant for Sullivan's crew, dumping the crates into the harbor. But they couldn't find Sullivan himself. The key was in the wires. Dante's technical team had managed to clone several of the burner phones used by Sullivan's inner circle. They were intercepting hundreds of audio files, voicemails, brief conversations, radio check-ins, but the technical team was useless. Sullivan's men were communicating entirely in that thick encrypted Gaelic slang. The corporate translators the Costa family had on retainer listened to the tapes and quit within hours. The library was converted into a listening post. Harper hadn't slept in 2 days. She sat at a long oak table surrounded by monitors, tangled wires, and empty coffee cups. She wore a pair of heavy noise-canceling headphones, her eyes closed, listening to the harsh, scraping voices of murderers. Dante rarely left the room. He sat in a leather armchair in the corner, nursing a glass of scotch, watching her work. He was the commander, waiting for his sniper to take the shot. Track 42, Harper said, her voice. She didn't open her eyes. The tech sitting next to her hit a button. The audio filled the room. It was 2 men speaking rapidly, their voices distorted by bad reception. The old dog is resting where the iron meets the salt. Tell the boys to bring the heavy coats. The roof is leaking. Literal translation, the tech side. It means nothing. Probably a construction site. No, Harper said. She pulled the headphones down around her neck and opened her eyes. She looked at Dante. They aren't talking about construction. Dante set his glass down and walked over to the table. What are they saying, Harper? She tapped her pen against the legal pad filled with her chaotic shorthand notes. Sullivan is the old dog. Where the iron meets the salt isn't a factory. In the specific regional slang Sullivan's father used in the old country, iron refers to train tracks, but salt is the ocean. They are talking about the old abandoned rail yards right on the edge of the industrial harbor, the ones that flood during high tide. Carmine, standing by the door, frowned. And the heavy coats, the leaking roof. Heavy coats means body armor, Harper translated, her voice turning cold. And a leaking roof means they are expecting an assault from above. They know we're looking. They are dug in at the flooded rail yards. Dante leaned over the table, staring at the digital audio waves on the monitor. He didn't ask if she was sure. He trusted her implicitly. The hesitation that had existed between them a month ago was entirely eradicated. He straightened up and looked at Carmine. Assemble the tactical team. I want 3 units. Hit the railyards from the water and the access road. No prisoners. Sullivan doesn't walk out of that yard breathing. Carmine nodded grimly and left the room, pulling his phone from his pocket. Dante turned back to Harper. She looked pale, dark circles bruising the skin under her eyes. She stared at the audio equipment, the reality of what she had just done settling heavily on her shoulders. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She wasn't even just a translator. She was the intelligence officer who had just painted a target on a man's back. Go upstairs, Harper, Dante said gently. It was the softest she had ever heard his voice. Get some sleep. It will be over by morning. I just killed him. Harper whispered, staring at the monitor. I listened to a tape, translated a sentence, and condemned a man to death. Dante reached out, his hand wrapping around her shoulder. His grip was firm, grounding her. You didn't kill him. Sullivan killed himself the moment he ordered his men to open fire in that warehouse. You just told me where to find the corpse. It doesn't feel like that, I know. Dante's thumb slowly brushed the side of her neck, a gesture so deeply intimate it made her breath catch. The first time you understand the weight of this life, it crushes you. But you don't carry this, Harper. I do. My finger pulls the trigger. My soul pays the toll. You are just the voice that guides me through the dark. He released her and walked toward the door. He was going with the strike team. He wouldn't let his men finish a war he started without leading from the front. Dante, Harper called out. He stopped, his hand on the doorframe, and looked back. Don't miss, she said. A dark, dangerous smile touched the corners of his mouth. I never do. Harper sat in the library for the next 3 hours. She didn't go upstairs. She didn't sleep. She sat by the tactical radio, listening to the encrypted static. At 4:12 a.m., the radio crackled to life. It was Carmen's voice, breathing heavily, the sound of the ocean roaring in the background. The dog is put down. I repeat, Sullivan is dead. Area secure. We are coming home. Harper closed her eyes. She let out a long, shuddering breath. The war was over, but the peace felt infinitely more terrifying. The morning sun broke through the heavy rain clouds, casting long golden shadows across the pristine grounds of the Costa estate. Harper stood by the massive floor-toseling windows in the study, watching the black SUVs roll back through the iron gates. The vehicles were mud-splattered and scarred with fresh bullet holes. Men stepped out, exhausted, checking their weapons, smoking cigarettes with shaking hands. The door to the study opened. Dante walked in. He smelled of smoke, rain, and violence. The bespoke suit he wore was ruined, dusted with drywall, and stained with engine grease. He looked more exhausted than she had ever seen him, yet there was a predatory calmness radiating from him. The king had defended his crown. He walked to the heavy oak desk and tossed a black leather duffel bag onto the polished wood. It hit the surface with a heavy, muffled thud. He then reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a small blue booklet, tossing it next to the bag. A passport. Harper turned away from the window, her heart slamming against her ribs. She looked at the bag, then at the passport, and finally up at Dante. "What is this?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "There is $2 million in untraceable cash in that bag," Dante said, standing behind the desk. His face was unreadable, a perfect emotionless mask. "The passport is clean. A new name, new background. I have a private plane fueled and waiting at the airport. It can take you anywhere in Europe or South America. Wherever you want to go." Harper stared at him. The air in the room suddenly felt thin, as if he had sucked all the oxygen out of it. "You're firing me, I'm Snort's freeing you," Dante corrected. He gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles turning white. "You saved my life in the warehouse. You gave me Sullivan on a silver platter last night. Your debt is paid, Harper, paid 10 times over. You said you didn't ask for this life. You said you were a prisoner in a velvet cage. The cage is open. Walk out." Harper looked at the duffel bag. $2 million. It was more money than she could comprehend. She could disappear. She could sit on a beach in Spain, drink wine, and never think about blood, bullets, or cartel slang ever again. She could be safe. She looked back at Dante. He was staring at her, his dark eyes intense, searching her face for her reaction. He wanted her to take it. Or rather, he believed she should take it for her own sake. But as Harper looked at him, the bleeding, exhausted, brutal man who had thrown his own body over hers to block a spray of bullets, she realized a terrifying truth. She didn't want to leave. The terror of the past few weeks had burned away the frightened, invisible maid, who scrubbed floors for $22 an hour. She had tasted the power of sitting in the shadows, controlling the flow of a multi-billion-dollar empire with nothing but her voice and a translation. She had seen the raw, bleeding heart of a monster and found that it beat in time with her own. Safety was an illusion. She knew that now. The world was vicious. Whether you scrubbed its floors or ruled its streets, if she was going to live in a vicious world, she wanted to be standing next to the man who held the biggest gun. Harper walked slowly toward the desk. She didn't look at the money. She didn't look at the passport. She picked up the blue booklet, opened it, glanced at the fake name printed inside, and then calmly dropped it into the heavy brass trash can beside the desk. Dante's eyes tracked the movement. He swallowed hard, the muscles in his jaw clenching. "What are you doing?" "I don't like the name," Harper said smoothly. She stopped on her side of the desk, meeting his gaze head-on. "And I don't want the money." "Harper," Dante warned, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Do not play games with this. If you stay in this house, you don't get to leave when you get tired. You don't get to walk away the next time bullets fly. You belong to the family. You belong to this life." He paused, his voice dropping an octave. "You belong to me, I know." Harper stepped around the side of the desk. She invaded his space, entirely fearless. She reached out, her hands resting flat against his chest, right over his heart. It was beating fast, a frantic, heavy rhythm that betrayed the calm facade he was trying to project. "The maid is gone, Dante," Harper said, looking up into his eyes. "She died in the warehouse. I speak for you. I listen for you. You don't get to put me on a plane just because you feel guilty for dragging me into the dark." Dante stared down at her. The mask finally shattered. The ruthless control he maintained over every aspect of his life snapped. He moved with sudden, overwhelming speed. His hands came up, framing her face, his fingers threading into her hair. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, romantic kiss. It was aggressive, possessive, and fueled by weeks of suppressed adrenaline and terror. It tasted of smoke and the expensive scotch he had been drinking all night. Harper gasped against his mouth, her hands gripping the lapels of his ruined suit, pulling him closer. She kissed him back with equal ferocity, surrendering entirely to the gravity of the man and the empire she had chosen. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. both of them breathing heavily in the quiet study. "You're entirely insane," Dante muttered, a dark, breathless chuckle vibrating in his chest. "Probably," Harper agreed, closing her eyes, feeling the warmth of him against her skin. "But Gaston is calling at noon to finalize the shipping routes, and if you let the new corporate guy translate, he's going to accidentally declare war on France." Dante smiled, a genuine rare expression that transformed his harsh features. He stepped back, wrapping one arm securely around her waist, anchoring her to his side. He looked toward the heavy mahogany doors of the study, the boundary between them and the rest of his dangerous world. "Let him call," Dante said quietly, his grip on her tightening. "The boss is listening." If you loved this intense, high-stakes conclusion to Dante and Harper's dangerous romance, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible audio stories. What did you think of Harper's ultimate choice to embrace the darkness and stay by Dante's side? Did she make the right call, or should she have taken the money and run? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow Mafia romance fans and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next thrilling upload.